Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to make a video to talk a little bit about some quality assurance items and things that are on the horizon that we need to do for 2026. Okay, so we lived through a pretty fun time last week, and basically there was one chain, and then transaction came in, and then we had kind of two parallel versions of history. And then they fought for a little while, and then they came back together, and then we're running. So when you have a hard fork or complete consensus failure inside the system, you run, and then suddenly you run, and there's no way to put them back together. So as a result, you have to stop the network and manually restart the network. So human beings come in here, and those human beings say, okay, well, checkpoint, and then you're done. So this is the type of stuff that Solana's had to deal with when they've had to restart their network, but there's been other cases where people have had to do this. Traditionally, the chain just runs and runs and runs and runs. So Cardano has been in this state for about 8 years, give or take. And last week, we were in this state right here. And this is quite a dangerous thing because while you're operating with this duality, there's a collection of actors, bridges, exchanges, and DeFi in particular. They live in a world where this is the usual, and as a result, they just assume that the chain is running in a particular configuration. In this world, you've temporarily doubled the supply. You have two alternative versions of history, and technically you could spend ADA here and you could spend ADA here, and it's effectively like a double spend. It's a little different from a definitional sense because from the perspective locally, a double spend never happens. But globally, you actually have two subsets of ADA that you're dealing with. Bridges don't understand that. Exchanges don't understand that. DeFi doesn't understand that. They're programmed for one version of history. So there's a write-up that's coming. Pi's putting it together, and it's a wonderful, wonderful write-up. And we're all coordinating a lot of disclosures and other things, and there's series of escalations in terms of the technical depth and rigor of these things to talk about what happened, how it came back together. But it's truly miraculous that we were able to build a system that was able to self-heal and self-recover. So basically, it was a degradation of service soft fork that was self-healing. Self-healing in that the network upgraded to a version that it could choose a side and the history is reconciled. And unfortunately, what ends up happening when you have a soft fork occur is that you have orphan blocks. So there's going to be a delta between those two. And this has happened over 3,000 times with mining in the Bitcoin space for Bitcoin. So before people say, oh, well, that's a design flaw and you guys fucked up and everything's bad. Well, you Bitcoiners have lived with that for 3,000 plus times because every time a miner makes a version of history and then the minority chain catches up and supersedes that, then there's now a new longest chain. And the block in the old longest chain gets discarded. And all those transactions are no longer happened, which is why people wait for finality. They wait a certain amount of blocks, usually 6 blocks in the Bitcoin space. So this can happen in the local sense. It's very common for Nakamoto-style consensus. Typically, you don't have a long chain reorg. So a long chain reorg is when you have it occur over a large amount of blocks, like 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 200. So this is why bridges, exchanges, and DeFi, they tend to have different settlement time than the network time. They say, before we consider your deposit to be legitimate, we wait maybe 100 blocks or 200 blocks or something like that. All right. So the single most important thing when you start looking at this is how do we prevent and detect? Those are the two words that you're looking for. Prevent this from happening and detect. And then what happened last week, fix. All right, so if you have this situation, the fix is rather straightforward. The network shuts down. And you're not a cryptocurrency for a while, and you have to launch a new cryptocurrency. You've effectively manually stitched together the network, and you've invented a new version. So it's kind of like Star Trek with the transporters. You know, some people believe that when you're using the transporters in Star Trek, and you go and teleport yourself, you're no longer you, but you're a clone of you, and the old you was chopped up and killed in the teleporter. It's a similar situation here. We've transported you from one space and time to another space and time and edited something in it. So you're fundamentally different. You're no longer the original chain. You're a different chain. So that's about as catastrophic as it can become, and you typically don't want to have that occur. So you work really, really hard to do that. In the case here with the soft fork, it really is all about, well, what are the nature and characteristics of these chains? If you have slashing bonding systems, depending upon your flavor of proof of stake, not only can you put the chains back together, but it may result in actually a huge economic loss of all the people that bet wrong. So you have to be really careful with that. So Nakamoto consensus is really good on its recovery when you have a chain split and you pull the forks back together. And this is something that Satoshi really thought a lot about, and that's why we based Ouroboros on a lot of the concepts that Satoshi had. And this is the first time in the history of Cardano where we actually got to test it. It was deeply uncomfortable, but the system worked according to specification, which is why even Anatoly from Solana praised it, because he lives in this world, and we got to live in this world. And boy, I bet he wish he had that ability, because this is just a different thing. So that's fix, but what about detect and prevent? And that's what this video is basically about. So let's talk a little bit about detection and prevention. So starting with prevention, how Cardano works is you have a concept of blueprints, you have building, and then you have deploy and test. Okay, so we use formal methods up here, and those formal methods are derived from some form of paper, white paper. The paper follows a peer-reviewed process. We know that the protocols are pretty sensible. The blueprints are written in a formal language. Then we build, then we deploy and test. So it's very waterfall. There's no way to get around that process. Can't really be agile, because what if you discover something here, go some cases all the way back up the stack and do that. It's one of the reasons why Cardano has a slower development cadence than other chains, because a lot of cases what they do is they kind of live in like a spiral development, and they start with building and then deploying and learning, and then building and deploying and learning, and building and deploying and learning, and then they reach a point and they say, we just can't solve it anymore. All right, do the science thing here. We'll go solve some of those problems, and we'll just live with the system as it is. And then, oh, okay, now we solved that problem. Now we're doing it again. Spiral-driven development. All right, you could do that. This has always been a little waterfall-y. Now, this is tremendously useful for the prevention of bugs. 8 years we live in this state, and then suddenly for a day we're in this state, and we recover rather quickly in a way that did not require a hard fork and destroy the network. Pretty cool. And it did not require manual intervention of a centralized actor. It was an organic self-healing recovery where the network upgraded itself after a fix was propagated and the longest chain won. Okay? So this produces typically high quality but slow outcomes. Which is the biggest frustration that most people have with Cardano. They say it's too slow, too slow, too slow, can't catch up, market bad, etc., etc. Although you're probably all pretty glad that we had some mechanism to fix the network and have it self-heal, and those formal methods were actually used, last week, or otherwise we'd be in a really bad situation. So when we talk about prevention, you have to open up all of this process and say, okay, are we writing the right papers? Are we doing the blueprints right? Are we using those blueprints appropriately? And are we writing code in a very high quality way? And is the way that we're deploying and testing that code sufficient? All of these should be subject to scrutiny. So already I talked to Jack from Intersect, and I said, you're the oversight organization, and, we got egg on our face as the developer. We have to justify how these types of things aren't going to happen again and how we're going to do better on the prevention side. So we deserve to have to go through scrutiny as an engineering firm about how each of these components are going to be improved in a way where they don't cost more and they don't take more time, but overall the flow through those components is producing better outcomes, because the bug that was exploited here existed since 2022. So for some reason it escaped scrutiny for 3 years, which is usually what happens with zero-day exploits. When somebody has a zero-day exploit, they have them in Windows, they have them in Linux, your phone has them. Usually that exploit comes from an old bug, not something brand new. And it just is innocuous and innocent. Maybe it's not a bug on the surface, but when combined with some other piece of software, it becomes a bug. Software is an emergent system. There's infinite complexity inside of it. So this will happen. And no matter what you do, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have some bugs inside the systems, which why we have to move to the second step. And this is where I would say we are the weakest right now. We got a little lucky with this particular bug that we just happen to be heavily monitoring the network and doing simulations and other things for the Laos upgrade, and there's independent node builders that are testing and playing with things. So there's a higher level of scrutiny over the normal operation of the network. What outside people don't understand is that when you get into a state like this or this, you don't instantly get an email in your box saying there's a problem with Cardano. You think everything's fine for a while. It's kind of like a small leak somewhere in your walls. Like a little pipe starts leaking, a little crack forms. It's not like you get a text message saying, hey, it's your pipe from your basement in the wall that's covered up. I just want to let you know I'm starting to leak and I'm going to be an issue in 2 weeks. No, 2 weeks later, you notice the wall's really moist and there's mold growing. Your hand can go through the drywall and you say, holy shit, I have a leak. So similarly, when these things happen, you don't instantly know that they happen. There are telltale signs that they happen. Things like chain quality deteriorate or other such things. And you say, wait a minute, I think there's something going on with the network. I'm not exactly sure. So we have a collection of informal processes and procedures. But one of the things you can do, and I think we're going to explore this in the postmortem and the retrospective, is that you have the main network. It would be nice to construct a Canary network, which is a lot faster, and it doesn't serve an economic purpose, it serves an observational purpose. So what a Canary network can do is it can look at the main net as kind of a watchman. And it can look from many different perspectives. So it can be composed of multiple nodes. It can have many ways of looking at the chain in the ledger, and it's constantly pinging the main net. In a way where it's getting kind of a challenge response. And it's a very fast network. So, and it's geographically well distributed. And the nodes have independent implementations, multiple nodes, independent implementations. It's super fast sub-second latency. It's geographically well distributed. So there's a node cluster in each continent. And as a result, what it can do is it can act as an early detection system if something is going on inside the system and exactly where that thing is going on. So it's also capturing, and it has a cloned mempool that's enhanced. Because normally when you think of a mempool, you're just saying, what's my set of work that I have to do for the next block? And people just take it off the bench and they go and do something with it. We don't typically think about how do I preserve the mempool history of what people are spamming the network with for a long period of time. In fact, we prune that out. But with a system like this, you can preserve days or weeks of history of pending transactions, just not finalized transactions. You could be geographically well distributed, and you can have all kinds of pinging scenarios that exist, and you can be composed of multiple independent nodes. So we don't have a formal notion of a canary network right now, which is why we got lucky when the detection was early and we were able to intervene with a patch. The other thing is that a canary net has a synergistic relationship with people who live here, your bridges, your exchanges, and your DeFi. If there appears to be, statistically speaking, probabilistically speaking, a problem, there's something going on, you'd like and this is a second part, a signal mechanism where you can put up a flag and say to all the users, or at least the users that subscribe to you, hey, there is issue. Much sad. Something's going on. Well, the sooner you can do that, the sooner they can flip a switch on their infrastructure that tells that infrastructure, stop. It doesn't say refund the money or, go ahead and shut down your service forever. Halt the service. Because in this situation, you have a tenuous situation where people can game it to steal money from these actors. Long chain reorgs are very uncommon, once every 8 years, not coming up very often. But you need a mechanism to immediately let them know that there's something there and stop. And what you can even do is you just put this into pending. So you let users still interface with it, but stuff doesn't settle. It goes into pending and it goes into a queue, and there's a delay in the processing of the transaction till further instruction comes. So you don't necessarily lose commerce, you just slow it down while you're waiting to investigate, because it may be a false positive. It may be something very significant. Because typically with a canary network, you also think about what's called an anomaly detection system. And you can use AI, for this. And there's tons of amazing anomaly detection systems that can be tuned and parameterized, but when they're watching the system, they can say, hey, there's something that's out of the ordinary. The pings aren't coming back right. Consensus is not being achieved appropriately. There's some issue here that it's not really working out. We're not really sure what it is. So then you go to the signaling mechanism and you go over here and you say, okay, bridges, exchanges, and DeFi, stop. You also can have wallets if they're managed wallets, like Lace, for example, saying don't relay transactions yet. Just basically send a message that Canary mode's been flipped on. So this requires a pub/sub protocol. I've been asking for it for 8 years. And the reason why there were certain departures in our network team is just they were philosophically opposed to even broaching the topic, even though we've even written papers about this. So there's some fresh blood, and it's a high priority for me for 2026. We will find a path to get this done. Pub/sub is not an option. It is absolutely essential for us to have things like a Canary network and a means of easily communicating and coordinating with people. We manually had to call, email, or message, and all the state pool operators, all the exchanges, all the DApp people. People spent 30 hours straight doing that, and it's lucky that we all kind of grew up with them and we all know most of them. If we didn't have the ability to do that, it would have taken a lot longer for the network to be able to self-heal, and the range of damage done by being in this problematic mode would be catastrophic. PubSub means you can instantly push a button and send a message to all of those actors, and every single person's informed at the same time. This incident alone demonstrates the existential need for it, and I'm so fucking tired of people fighting me on it. It has to get done. So that's going to be a priority for 2026. I don't care how we get it done, especially given the fact that this can be a separate network protocol running in a separate network. The Canary network has to have the ability to talk to, but it does not have to share the same infrastructure and use the same protocols as the main network because it serves a different purpose. It's an anomaly detection system, and its purpose is to basically monitor the network and create a concept of network health. Every cryptocurrency needs this. And you need a set of protocols and KPIs and other things. We have them, we track them, we use it when we build it, but it's fragmented a little bit. And they need to be standardized and put into a system. So on the detection side, if you have early detection, then you can have early intervention, and that means that the resolutions are much less problematic. Because if all the people that are engaging in commerce are able to lock down rapidly, then these types of modes don't have any economic consequences, and it gives people more time to recover the network and self-heal the network. Now, fixing is completely dependent upon your protocol. If you have an Ouroboros style protocol or Nakamoto consensus proof of work, you're going to have probably the path to self-heal. If you have a BFT protocol, you're shit out of luck if you go past the point of no return, and then you have this type of thing, and you have to manually reset the network. So there are things you can do to plan for your worst case situation. If your Canary network is observing the entire network, this is also the perfect place to make mithril certificates. Checkpoints and proofs. It's the perfect place, and what you can do is you can have a multi-chain embedding with those. So you take those and you have an on-chain path, and then you have an off-chain path. So on the on-chain path, you can store them in Cardano, occasionally and periodically, or at least the Merkle root of these representations. And off-chain, you can put them places like Iagon, for example, or on the Bitcoin blockchain as a rune. There's dozens of ways you can do that. So there's a small fee because these are small representations, but they're occasionally archiving things. So when you go back to fix, if you do have to kind of reset things, worst case scenario, the Solana case, then you have a source of truth that everybody agrees is there, and it has some degree of auditability and provability about it, especially since you have more sophisticated dumps of the mempool. Okay, so this right here is already underway, this whole concept of a mithril certificate network, and then you can start talking about checkpoints with mithril and all kinds of different proofs. Starstream also provides an alternative proving mechanism. And by the way, this is also where you start with quantum resistance in a non-disruptive way, because you can sign these representations with lattice or hash-based signatures that are immune to quantum computers. So even if a quantum computer tries to interfere with the sovereignty of the chain to rewrite the chain, that's totally fine. You have a fallback here to recover the state of affairs. Then there's a meta thing. It kind of lives here, and it's the constitution and intention. Constitution and user intention. Okay, so there's these very naive people floating around saying code is law, code is law, code is law. And I was a code is law person when there's no alternative. So the question is, what matters, the user intent or the code's intent? You have code or you have user. Well, users are subjective and retroactive. They meant to do it in the moment, but now in knowing the consequences, maybe I didn't mean to do that with the information I know today. And That's a problem. Whereas code is objective and unambiguous, but some cases it does the wrong thing or creates a bad outcome for everybody. So what you do is you start making this more objective and you say there's a meta law above the code and basically the constitution's there. So we have a Cardano constitution and the vast majority of ecosystems don't. They never invested in it. They didn't give a shit about it. And as a result, they completely ignore it in the analysis of code as law. We have one, and it's ratified on chain, which means it is the highest law of Cardano. Why is it the highest law? Because it legitimizes the on-chain government to make changes to Cardano. Hard forks, soft forks, make changes to the protocol parameters, make changes to the reward function, all kinds of things. Okay, so there's a constraining function. I'm going to show you guys some of the tenets. And here are the tenets of the Cardano Constitution. Okay, so you have tenet 1, transactions on the Cardano blockchain shall not be slowed down or censored and shall be expediently served for their intended purpose. Cost of transactions be predictable. Anyone desiring to develop and deploy applications on the Cardano blockchain shall not unreasonably be prevented from developing and deploying such applications as intended. And it goes on and on. Cardano blockchain shall not lock in an ADA owner's value or data without the owner's consent. The Cardano blockchain shall not unreasonably impede interoperability. Cardano blockchain shall preserve in a safe manner any value and information stored on the Cardano blockchain. Cardano blockchain shall not unreasonably spend resources. The financial stability shall be maintained and the total supply of ADA shall not exceed 45 billion ADA. When you cause a soft fork, you've doubled the supply. You have 2 sets of ADA to spend. So it violates tenet 10. When you cause a soft fork, you're no longer safely preserving the value and information stored because one version of history is now orphaned when the chains reconcile and it's going to be lost. Okay? When you cause a soft fork, you're slowing down the system and you're removing expedient serving of the system. And of course, cost of transactions are not predictable in that particular state. So we have an objective metric that everybody agrees to, and you can look at this transaction and ask, is it constitutional? No. Thus, it is a violation of the use of the system. But then there's a group of people who say, well, none of that matters, even though your constitution is your highest law in your system. And because the bug executes it that way, it's a legal transaction inside the system. The other thing is, why do we not care about user intention? Because user intention is always going to be biased to the user in the moment they're asking. So you'll change your mind if it benefits you. You may have wanted to do it, but then you change your mind after you lost money and said, oh, I didn't intend to do that. So intention has to be proactive, not retroactive. So how do you describe intention? You need an actual intention language, and these are called intents. NEAR has them. We're starting to get them. And so you no longer have a transaction. You instead go to intention. And then you ask, is this intention lawful with the constitution of the system? And if it is, then a process will build a transaction and produce a proof back to the user that that transaction satisfies their intention. Now, however that process works, if the transaction does not satisfy the intention, then the transaction is wrong. In the strict code as law sense, they say your intention doesn't matter. This on-chain constitution doesn't matter. All that matters is this transaction. And if it's bad, it's bad. You lose all your money. Boo-hoo, go fuck yourself. Go home. You're stupid and unwashed. And, this is the risk you take using crypto. And that's great if there's no value at risk. And that's great if you have 10 users and they all have PhDs in computer science and it's just a fun game. That is not real in a large commercial system because you have to have this concept of intervention. When the intention was not satisfied, when the Constitution was violated, there needs to be something in the system for the system to self-correct and maintain its integrity. That's what we're really talking about here. The autopoeticism of the system, the integrity preservation. A system cannot have integrity if the system is unable to follow the rules of the system and maintain the intentions of the users of the system. The point of blockchain is to have a high fidelity system that preserves its integrity when people use it. It's not to have a system that punishes people arbitrarily and capriciously for people clever enough to find bugs. If the second definition is there, it has no social value. No one will use it for voting. No one will use it for high assurance applications. No one will use it for education or healthcare. No one will use it for nation states work. No one will use it for the markets. It makes absolutely no sense at all. You have to have an integrity preserving system, and to do that, you have to have unambiguous rules, and you have to have the ability to capture the intention proactively, not retroactively. Proactive intention. If you change your mind after you've broadcasted, it's not the fault of the system. Just like if you're at the gambling table and you think it's a good idea to say, hit me, and you get the wrong cards and you lose the hand in blackjack, that's your problem, not the house's problem. The game has integrity. There's clear rules about it. Your intention was very clear. You understood the risks going into it. You made the decision. The transaction was issued. There you go. It wouldn't be a high integrity system if it wasn't a fair deck. And so if you find out that the deck was being shuffled in a way to benefit the house, this violates the intention of the user. You would have only made that bet assuming a fair deck, and this violates the laws of the system that regulate the system. And you have a low integrity game. You have a biased game. Would you go and play the game if you know it's rigged against you? No. So it's very clear there's a common understanding of these types of things, and this is totally missing. It's relevant to this broader conversation because when you look at detect, prevent, detect, and fix, part of fixing, as you put things back together, is you're asking the question not, did the chains come back together? You're asking the question, did we satisfy the intentions of the users of the system that day in accordance with the Constitution as best as possible? That is an integrity preserving system at the end of the day. Now, this requires social coordination in addition to technical coordination. Protocols can only get you so far, which is why Nick Szabo talked about a concept of wet code versus dry code. Very fundamental document written years ago. And we OGs, we all remember it because we've had to think about it. There's the stuff that computers do well, and there's the stuff human judgment and fleshy brains do well. All these things, the white papers, blueprints, the building and testing, is to make your dry code better. Okay, so this is your mechanism of quality for dry code. When you look at wet code, that is a social process. And part of that is writing down the proactive intention. Part of that is learning and education. You have to make sure that people are of a certain knowledge. And part of that is checks and balances. So things like multi-sig, things like separation of power, things like temporal components where you force people to wait certain amounts of time to make decisions so they have time to adequately debate and think about that. Part of that is interim staging. So, for example, here with the detection component, that's mostly a wet space thing. Once you've detected there's an anomaly, you're sending a message, and then those particular systems have to make a decision. Do we feel comfortable operating in an amber alert, or do we feel or do we want to take a step back and stop for a moment? Social convention and processes. And this is the world of ISOs, like 27001. This is the world of best practices. This is the world of standards. This is the world of governance, effectively. Cardano is one of the first cryptocurrencies, along with Tezos and a few others, to explicitly on the chain create equal precedence on both. And so the wet code is ultimately regulated by the Constitution. That code's law is equivalent to, and in some cases greater than, the dry code. We started with excellence of dry code, and now we're working our way through the excellence of wet code. And we have governance systems here, And part of fixing can also then be, in a social sense, dispute resolution. So ultimately, dispute resolution comes down to risk and restitution. So, how do we quantify and manage the risk of the system? And when people are aggrieved, there's problems, how do they get restitution? How do they get made whole? So let's say some people lost money at a bridge exchange or in a DeFi sense as these chains split. Okay, so you have restorative justice and then you have punitive justice. So restorative means we make those people whole, and the people that are responsible for it have some sort of obligation to them. When you look at retribution, you're basically saying, okay, we're going to punish the people that are responsible. Any justice system, dispute resolution system, has to have a little bit of both. You want to disincentivize bad behavior, and there's mechanisms to do that, and you want to incentivize cooperation and people getting together. If we built this entire system the right way, and it stands the test of time, guess what the treasury of Cardano can do? On the risk side, we can actually get an insurance policy, just like fire insurance, for the entire network. The insurance policy can be owned by Cardano. The protocol itself is a legal entity. The treasury pays the premium, and then when an event happens, a claim can be filed for restitution. So let's say one of these things occurs and there's $1 billion of losses and there was $1 billion insurance policy. The policy can actually pay into a smart contract to allow people in a provable way to recover losses. You can even self-insure in a little bit. You can allocate a certain percentage of the treasury as a self-insurance pool to be augmented with external insurance. We can even create a real-world asset where the network pays a premium into that and people put up ADA or some other asset to basically get a passive yield until that insurance policy is called. So we can self-insure as a network or create a financial product for it. And there's other mitigations of risk management as well. A lot of the things I've talked up here are about risk management. Okay? Detecting risks is equally important because, like, if you find a fire early, the odds of the fire causing lots of damage is much lower. If you find a faulty electrical box before it goes into fire, you can just replace the electrical box, not look at it in the ruins of a burned down building. Okay? So risk management's there. We don't have a dispute resolution function quite yet because Cardano doesn't have a full judicial branch. We have a full legislative branch, a partial executive function, a partial judicial function. So as we think about upgrading the Constitution, future versions can talk about mechanisms of dispute resolution. That doesn't make sense unless you have a way to capture proactive intent. Because you objectively understand the contractual relationships that everybody wanted, and you can compare the intention from the transaction, and then you have something there, but you still would need arbitration in that case. And there's ways to even make this compatible through the New York Convention with law. So arbitration on Cardano would be upheld in the courts of 150 plus countries. So there's all kinds of ways you can do that. So we're learning as a network, we're growing, but the ultimate thing is all of this flows into integrity. The question is, how much trust and integrity do I have to have for onboarding? And there's stages to that. So you have early adopters and crypto anarchists. Okay, you have your early adopters. Sorry, my pen nub is almost done on this. I got to switch it. You have early adopters inside the system, and then you have kind of like institutions that are high risk, like hedge funds and traders, and they have sophistication, but they're willing to take a lot of risk. And then you go to more like the general public. And then, that's kind of what started happening in 2021, and they all got horribly burned because the systems didn't have enough integrity. And then you start getting to high assurance activities. high assurance activities like airplanes, hospitals, national infrastructure, voting infrastructure, these types of things. So there's a hierarchy, and we can explicitly list all of them. And as an exercise, you guys can kind of create your own list. Every single level requires integrity to grow. And only through the pursuit of excellence, following things like this and balancing things accordingly and time, can you grow your integrity. So here's what happens. When you have an event occur, it damages the integrity of the system. No matter what I say, no matter what we do, no matter how much money we spend on marketing, because of this incident, the integrity of Cardano has been damaged. There's going to be groups of people for days, weeks, months, years who will now believe Cardano is irreparably broken or not worth people's time, or it's an unsafe system. Whether that's a justified or unjustified belief, they now believe that. And integrity is ultimately subjective. It's a measurement of some group's belief in the durability of something. Why do you think gold is valuable? Is it some intrinsic property inside the material that just gold has, and magically it's always guaranteed to be valuable? It's valuable based upon your belief that society values it. What if a new religion forms in society, the anti-gold religion, and they're all like pious men and women, and they say gold is a product of the devil, and any person possessing gold will be immediately executed, burnt alive at the stake? What do you think that's going to do to the price of gold? The intrinsic properties of the material have not changed, but the value in the material has gone down because the markets have effectively been destroyed for it. Or let's say a magic machine has been developed that can just all of a sudden make gold out of thin air. Or let's say that space mining becomes a thing and they go find an asteroid that has 1,000 times the gold on it than the entire Earth has. You have beliefs about how gold is perceived, the supply function of it, the difficulty in making it and extracting it, and you have beliefs of its long-term durability. Why are those beliefs solid? Because gold has been used and valued for over 5,000 years. The temporal component of its stability has been enduring, and thus you have a cultural perception of the value of gold, reinforced at many different levels. And blockchains ultimately as social artifacts are no different. You believe blockchains are valuable because the blockchain works as intended. And you believe that because you have evidence of long-term operations. Bitcoin has run for 16 years. Cardano has run for 8 years. And it works until it doesn't. And the minute that it doesn't, the question is it self-healing? Is it able to overcome and fix it? Or did the whole system fall apart? If the system is self-healing, you have belief that the system has high integrity. It works like a tank, it drives like a tank, and even when it gets stalled, it finds a way to get out of the stall and keep on moving. And you have faith in the system if the system has good restitution and risk management. So even when a disaster happens, money's around to fix it, and a disaster happens, the victims of the disaster are compensated. When you put all these components together, you have a high integrity system. And then you can climb the ladder from early adopters to institutions to general public, to climb the ladder to high assurance activities. And once you do all of that, then you can put society on a blockchain and society can get all those things. So that's what we do. And every time one of these incidents happens, it's a teachable moment for us as an ecosystem to improve the state of affairs. We go back to first principles and we say, is the dry code working for us? The answer is no, because an incident happened that caused a big problem. We have to fix that. Then we go down and we say, okay, do we have an early detection system that we're happy with? And the answer is no. So that means next year we got to build a proper Canary network and improve a fragmented thing and make it one thing that everybody can use. Are we happy with our ability to communicate with key leaders and key stakeholders in the ecosystem, like the bridges, exchanges, DeFi, wallets? No. So we need to invest in building a PubSub protocol and get this unstuck and remove people from power that are trying to stop this from getting into the network. It's catastrophic that we don't have it. It would make multi-sig easy, for example. It would make it easy for your stake pool operator to communicate with you. It would make it easy for your DREP to communicate with you. You just subscribe to them. It's absurd in 2025 that this has been stalled by the egos of the few. Okay, then are we happy with our fixing? Well, there's two sides to it. One thing is once we put it back together, is it put back together in a way that's integrity preserving? And then the other side is, do we have a dispute resolution system? The answer is no. Do we have a risk management system like an insurance pool? The answer is no. Do we have a restitution system? The answer is no. So, do we have a conception of user intention? The answer is not yet, but we're building in that direction. Okay, so 2026 is going to be a vibrant, active year. Laos gives us the ability, because we're performing surgery, to really improve the dry code state of affairs and also build in a direction where we can have a Canary network and build in a direction where we can start capturing user intention. That's why nested transactions are so important to me. When you look at Babel fees, it's the very first example of a protocol level intention system. And if I can start building that, I can create a language for intention that's relatively unambiguous, and then we can compare the transactions that happen to the user intention, and we can get much better statistics, especially on the Canary side, about what's going on. Constitution is successful. It's a single source of truth. We have tenets, which is why I can unambiguously say that when that attacker submitted that transaction, he broke the constitution of the system. And the code did not define the intended use. Our Constitution does. That person broke the law. They tampered with a piece of public infrastructure, and we have unambiguously an example of that. And it was severe enough to cause economic harm to people, so it reaches the magnitude of criminality. So in the requisite jurisdictions, they can deal with that. Cardano doesn't have to do that in dispute resolution. It lives strictly on the cleanup mode of the economic harm and who pays. It can be nobody. It can be the Treasury. It can be an insurance pool, or it can be the attacker to the victims through an off-chain arbitration process through law enforcement, if they believe in restorative justice, or through torts. All these things are immaterial to the conversation of today, but they all feed into a broader concept of integrity, and the existence of it organically creates real-world adoption. You can't astroturf this. You can't fake it. You can't pretend like you have it. It's equivalent to you going around painting bars of lead and saying they're gold. Kind of weighs like gold, but the minute you look at it, you realize it's not the real thing. It's fake gold. You cannot fake integrity. Either you have it or you don't, and it's ultimately a temporal and subjective thing. And it's derived from lived experiences. It's derived from the relationship of wet code and dry code and the amount of redundancies and checks and balances. And if you don't believe me, here's the simplest possible example. And vast majority of you listening have had to make this choice. So here's you, and here's a door. Now, that door has a probability of two events. You go through it, and there's a non-zero probability that as a result of going through that door, you die. We don't know what that probability is. We don't know what the probability of life is pretty simple. This is a binary thing. Either you live or die. So it's 1 minus p death. Okay? So whatever that probability of death is, that's your probability of life. All right. So the question then is, would you go through that door? Now, when you first hear this, because humans are humans, the vast majority of people say, I would never go through a door if there's a chance of dying. But you all have. Here's why. Airport. You go right on through that door into the terminal, into the ramp, allows you to go ahead and connect to the plane. So you walk through the plane door. And the only reason you're willing to do that is you have a belief that P death is low. Why do you believe that? Because for the past 100 years, every person on the planet has been working hard at trying to improve the integrity of that system. So, in other words, we want P death to decline. It'll never be zero, but you go through that door because you believe that it's very small and everybody's invested in making it smaller year by year. You would not go through that door if P death was 25% or 50%. You just wouldn't. You'd find some other way of doing things. And that's the thing. That's the ultimate mental model of integrity. You do something, and there's a life condition and a death condition. I'll give you another one. It's even simpler. You did it today, probably. I did it today. You get in a car. When you get into that car, there's a P death. And there's a P life. Might be small, might be high, but you'd be pretty angry if the design of cars and the design of public infrastructure and the quality of drivers is such that P death is very high or increasing year by year instead of decreasing. So our car is a high integrity system. They're lower integrity because there's much more deaths than airplanes. Are airplanes high integrity systems? For the most part, but yet they still fall out of the sky and kill you. So when you look at something that runs your society, it has to have that same P life, P death concept about it. It's earned, and it's earned from a combination of algorithms and technology and redundancies. It's earned through a series of social processes, and it's earned from a layering of concepts: prevention, detection, and resolution. And it's earned from risk management. And when you put all those components together, collections of rewards and punishments as well, you have integrity preservation inside the system. So, where is Cardano today? We're still a high integrity system. The fact that we recovered from something like this without having to go to the worst case scenario is a testimony to the incredible engineering of a lot of people. And I believe in those people, and I think that they've done a phenomenal job. But we're at a checkpoint where when we look to 2026, we have to recognize that there are things we must do internally and externally to improve the integrity of the system. We have to start building out a much better corpus on the wet code side, the social processes and risk management. We have to build some additional technologies on the dry code side and speeds things up and get better coordination. And externally, we have to do better at marketing. It comes back down to that again and again and again and again and again. Because none of this matters if you have people that just simply lie. And going back to the airplane example, what if every single time a plane crashes, there's a dedicated group of people that go out and they spend 4 weeks straight basically replaying that crash again and again and again and again and again and telling everybody this is like going to happen every time you go into an airplane. We had this. It was called the Hindenburg incident. Zeppelins were actually not fundamentally unsafe, and there was a lot of things to improve the state of affairs, and if we kept evolving them, they probably would have been a viable form of transportation, especially inter-Atlantic. But because everybody saw the Hindenburg thing, oh, the humanity, completely destroyed the whole vertical. So there's perception and reality, which is why integrity is a subjective process. So all these things we do are the objective input into a subjective perception. So who is accountable for improving that subjective perception? And if no one's there, the integrity we've built doesn't matter. It's Betamax. No one will use it. So we also in 2026 have to be better at doing that. That's why we tried really hard with the one-pager with Intersect, and we went out there and we tried really hard with all the postmortems and other things, but you'll already see flooding Twitter, all these people saying Cardano was brought down by a vibe coder and the network completely failed and everybody lost all their money. But don't worry, nobody uses it, so it's okay. That's what's being said. It's fucked up and terrible, but that's the subjective experience of many other ecosystems. So who are the ambassadors to go in and talk with them? I last night went into an XRP space and I talked to all of them and told them the facts, and they're excited about the fact that we recovered, and there's a great admiration there. Anatoly, to his credit, to the Solana community, praised what happened and said, hey, there's actually something special, and Cardano did something great. So who's doing that for us for SWE and Avalanche and Aptos? That is a fundamental social question, because none of this other stuff matters if you don't do that thing too. You have to do them both. And that's an important budget item for 2026 that we have to discuss, an important delegated authority in 2026 to make sure it gets done so we can improve the subjective reality, because we know how to improve the objective. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.